A few years ago, Exxon made headlines when they began offering thousands of dollars to scientists who are willing to write papers on how climate change wasn't real. Today, corporate money is flowing unrestricted to universities. I have Ring of Fire contributors Joe Kotchett and Mike Berg with me to talk about what corporate money is doing to academic research. Joe, just in the last 3 decades, we've seen the numbers skyrocket where we have private industry packing money into university settings so they can create their own tailored kind of research. I think the number has increased 250% just in the last 3 decades. It doesn't bode well for real science, does it?
It does not. Not only that, Mike, we're seeing in academic centers like Boston, the Bay Area, Texas, they are literally surrounding the universities now with, quote, corporate headquarters to influence the product that they're getting out of publicly paid professors. I mean, BP, all the oil companies, but the biggest offender of all is the pharmaceuticals, because the pharmaceutical companies are raping and pillaging medical schools with money to get beneficial reports back on new drugs that they otherwise would never get.
Michael, I know you see this a lot. You handle some of the huge pharmaceutical cases in this country, but one of the easiest stories to follow is the BP story. It is where BP, we have a report come from a university, Stanford University, and it looks like, it actually looks like there is some objectivity to it. And in that report, what we start seeing is that the professor is talking about how there is a new microorganism, and the new it was Berkeley University.
Right.
But the professor is talking about we have a new microorganism, and this BP spill is not a big problem. 250 million gallons of oil in the Gulf, 11 people dead, an entire ecosystem destroyed. And this professor from UC Berkeley is trying to defend all that. Give me your take on it.
Well, BP has basically bought their way into both UC Berkeley as well as the University of Illinois. One of the dangers here is they're creating non-science. I think Joe hit it on the head. It's not science. They're making this stuff up. They're trying to use these schools to give us some fake science with propaganda. The scary part, Mike and Joe and the audience out there, is they also are attacking people who are doing real science. We've seen this in Big Pharma. We've had professors in Harvard, Jerry Ahorn, who's written about it, where he's told that if he's willing to give an honest opinion about what's going on in Big Pharma, he could not only lose his job, but the school is going to lose their grants. And you combine that with what's going on with the sequester, where $8.7 billion are being taken away from real funding of science, we're all in real trouble here because they're just going to control it.
Joe, isn't the bottom line here, I mean, let's reduce it just common sense. Corporations don't put money in a university unless they expect to get something back. I mean, isn't that just common sense? They don't do this out of the goodness of their heart. They don't do this because they're trying to extract something. That's what we always see, isn't it?
Well, that's the tragedy, and that's the tragic situation that's now developing. The fact of the matter is, I have no problem with corporate America putting money into universities. It's the problem for the quid pro quo. Now, the universities, let's take Stanford, for example, one of our great universities, had tremendous guidelines or very strong guidelines in place as to what could be done with corporate money. In fact, a local newspaper, the San Jose Mercury, found that 1/3 of the faculty at Stanford Medical School had a total conflict of interest when it came to pharmaceuticals. Now, what we have to look at is our national priorities. I don't want to get off into these wars we're fighting, but we're spending $10 billion a month on a couple of wars, Afghanistan and still Iraq. Could you imagine if you took that $10 billion and put it now, as we did after World War II, put that back into universities, but the trend is going exactly the other way. And that's the point that Mike raises, that's the point that you raise, and that's what people are seeing out there. As a matter of fact, it goes so far, the professor from Berkeley that came up with this microorganism that was going to eat the oil, so to speak, right away within 30 days, He was criticized by his fellow faculties. By the way, P.S., nothing else happened. He's still around, still professing the integrity of that report.
And by the way, Berkeley never even changed their standards. That's what's important here. For example, Michael, at University of Florida, here in Florida, they take money. They'll take money from a corporation, but they have guidelines. They say, no, you are not going to tell us who to hire. Now, you just go down the road to Florida State University, just right down the highway from there. They took money from the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers had the last decision on who was going to be hired, what the courses that were going to be taught, how the course was going to be taught, what the content of the course was going to be. As a matter of fact, at FSU, this bonehead of a guy in charge there said, yeah, you can come, Mr. Koch, into our university, and you can just tell us what to do. As a matter of fact, 60 people were interviewed that the Kochs did not agree with, that didn't get the job to run these various parts of the business school there. 60 people that the Koch brothers said, no, we're going to give you the axe. Now, Michael, here's where this heads. Where's the fine line? What does the university do to protect itself?
Well, you know, the problem is that these universities, they need and want this money. The corporations out there, the Koch brothers, the big pharma, they're out there, they're going to give them the money. We ran into this not only at Florida State, but at some of the finest universities in the country. University of Pennsylvania. We said, we want you to do a study. We want you to do an independent study to determine on a particular drug, and Mike, I'm sure you're familiar with this, as to whether or not it would cause this particular problem. After stringing us along for almost a year, they came back and said, you know, we can't do that because we get so much money from the pharmaceutical industry that to do this independent study may offend them, and therefore we won't do it. This is outrageous. There is no science coming out of this, and there's no money being put in there except from the corporations. It's very scary.
Joe, what we saw happen, FDR had a great idea. In the 40s, FDR said, listen, we need to get the help from our universities to develop science for health, safety, and welfare of Americans. And we started seeing FDR pump money into universities. At one point, by the 70s, 70% of the money that went through the university came from the government for government research. And then all of a sudden, that's turned upside down. It's completely on its head. Back then in the 70s, only 3% of the money that was going to R&D at universities came from corporate America. How bad has that changed?
Well, it's not only changed dramatically, as you point out, with this sequestration that's now coming. I think the number is somewhere around $6 to $10 billion that universities are going to use next year. However, let me make one further point. What is the motive behind all this? It's not only, as Mike points out, the directing of reports, that is to say, to get favorable ratings, favorable opinions, favorable, quote, scientific reports. What they're also doing is paying universities or donating to universities to give them back a very important product, which is very significant, which are called patents. What they're doing is using university researchers to do all their work and then going to the U.S. Patent Office and claiming that is their patent. And under guidelines that they've now put in place to donate money to, quote, donate, to fund research, small little provisions in there are that anything found and developed will be patented by the donor of the fund of the money. That's a significant, huge problem that universities are now missing out on.
Mike, as far as bias, the British Medical Journal did a really important study in 2010. They found that a pharmaceutical industry-funded study through university is four times more likely to reflect the bias of the drug company that was doing the study. Now, that's not just limited to pharmaceutical companies. It's also, we saw with BP, the oil industry, you're going to get the bias there. There's really no other way to control that. I mean, Yale, if you think about it, Yale sent back $20 million to an industry, a corporation that wanted to have too heavy of hand in how they were conducting business. Don't we simply have to say to our university people, you have to draw the line, you have to be bold, or you're going to lose the edge of that intellectual honesty?
Absolutely. Intellectual honesty is where we send our children, and we've gone to universities. The problem you have is that not only, I think 4 times is an underestimate, to be honest with you. I think it's much greater than that. The other thing we have to be careful about when you look at Florida State, and now we look at Cal Berkeley and University of Illinois, is they're going to pick the professors. And not only are they going to do all the things Joe talked about, but now they're going to be educating the students to their view of thinking of what they believe is the corporate science, the science they're creating. And now we're going to have all these students who are going to be indoctrinated with the corporate mentality that what they're doing is actually honest and true, which it's not. We have to get the universities to say no, a very loud no.
Joe, in about a minute, what we see is the universities, when they're confronted with this, they still give you the illusion that they're in control. As a matter of fact, something like corporate America gives them that illusion. That's really disheartening, isn't it?
It's not only disheartening, Mike. Nowhere do we see that more than down at Stanford, right in the heart of Silicon Valley, because all of these young entrepreneurs are going over to Stanford University and using students and their research facilities over there in the new world of internet and social communications. It's very dramatic in terms of what they're doing to these young students, as Mike just pointed out. It is a culture that they are now developing. It's not only the Stanfords, it's the little schools all around the country that they are, quote, I hate to use this phrase, but buying up.
Yeah, they are. Joe Kotchett, Mike Berg, as usual. Important topic. We're seeing more attention, hopefully, from corporate media on this, but it's a topic we need to continue talking about. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Just ahead, we'll take a look at how hospitals are ripping off consumers by overcharging.